George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We have in the house the co-directors of the Vera House, Randy Bregman and Angela Douglas. Yes, I work with these talented, powerful women on a daily basis. And so we're here to talk about the resignation of Andrew Cuomo, but also the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. This is something that Vera House is actively engaged in the community, but also it's an opportunity for us to really take a pause and understand what's really happening. A lot of what the governor said, a lot of us had some various reactions to what the governor said. He seemed to be saying that his cultural background is partly to blame for the way he acts, right? He also said that he's sorry for the way they interpreted how he intended things to happen, something like that. In other words, what we were looking for was, my bad, I shouldn't have done that, I'll do better. We really didn't hear that. So let me start with, first of all, Vera House calling for the resignation of Andrew Cuomo. Randy, I'll start with you. That was significant in Vera House taking that stand. Why?
Well, I think when the initial allegations came out, we called for a thorough investigation. And I think the Attorney General did a very thorough investigation. And based on her findings, we thought that there was no other option than for the governor to do what was right and to step away from his position leading the state of New York and to take responsibility for the harm that was caused.
Yeah, it's interesting because in monitoring and looking at the Vera House social media, it wasn't clear to a lot of folks that these were not allegations anymore. Right? Angela, speak to that.
I think it's a critical piece, George, is, and I want to add what Randy is saying. We called in support of the investigation because due process is what we're founded on, right? That is the sense of justice and how it works in our country. But moving from the investigation, which is all allegations, to now it's founded. So 11 women have proven to be harmed, meaning they were sexually harassed by the governor. And let's also add in, it was founded that a workplace culture had been created that was toxic and harmful for those that worked in it. So it is not just merely sexual harassment, but we all now, I think what's important also for people to understand is we don't just get to call a workplace toxic because we want to. There are specific things under the Department of Labor that in order to be qualified as that must meet certain requirements and criteria. And for us to not recognize the weight of that, and I want to push in even more, for him to not recognize the weight of that. So to put that there has been founded evidence that proves that he sexually harassed 11 women, and then to say that my culture and my background, or even my age, my generation, has groomed and created me to do that. The challenge with that is it becomes excusatory, right? It is exactly the antithesis of what accountability looks like and what it is we're expecting.
One of the things he said, Randy, was that the line was, he didn't realize. Now, this is after he, in his own policies, as Vera House pointed out in its statement, had actually said on other occasions when other people were found to have been accused of sexual harassment in the workplace, he says to be a zero tolerance policy, right? But now he's saying that he didn't realize that the lines had been redrawn, right? And I think Vera House said something to the effect, no, Governor, the lines were always drawn. Speak to that.
I think for me, that was a really powerful reaction that I personally had, because I started my career almost 40 years ago as a young turning 20 and living in the culture and environment that is being described happening under the governor's leadership today. I experienced a lot of those comments and physical contact that was undesired and not consensual. And I had my lines very clearly drawn, but the people around me with power and privilege chose to act as if there were no lines. And so I really struggle with the idea that the lines have been redrawn. I think people with power and privilege are finally maybe being called to account to recognize that those lines have always been there and have been ignored for far too long.
Yeah, Angela, you wanted to add something to that? I see you
No.
nodding. In, oh, okay.
Oh yeah, I'm just in agreement.
No, so here's where we are, right? People are saying, well, what can I say? Can I say something? Can I hug somebody? Can I say they look nice? People are now confused about what they can and what they can't do. So I want you to sit with that for a minute. But then the other question I have is, given the way the governor, the first statement was, I'm going to fight this. Then the second statement was, I don't even know what the second statement was, but now the resignation within 13 days, we'll have the first woman governor and Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, which is a landmark in New York State. What he first said was not apologetic at all, right? And it seemed to imply that the victims were responsible for how they interpreted what he meant, right? And so, Angela, speak to this whole idea of intent versus impact, because I think that is something that when we talk about in our sexual harassment training, but also talking about yours, theirs, sexual harassment training in general, my feeling is this: I am responsible for the intent of what I say, but I don't know how it's going to impact the other person. So how do we get people to understand that it's both and?
Before I do that, I want to go back to the piece that you had mentioned that was related to, I just lost it. It was related to, I think, sort of, maybe it was Randy who mentioned this consent piece, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Randy mentioned, right.
Randy mentioned consent, yeah. So regardless, right, we are in a place, that's what it is. I wanted to be able to hold up this idea of consent and these lines being supposedly redrawn, which were never redrawn. And this idea, George, that you are saying people are confused about what it is we do. People are confused about kind of what can I do? What can I say? Let's just acknowledge, because it's an important one, that we are in a time of revolution in our world, right? Social norms and the way that they have previously been understood by a majority of people who have power and privilege to live by them in that way, are now changing. And they're not the same. And I think that does put people on the defensive. I think it does cause people to question. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think it's healthy, because here where we are, women, as the chair of the Survivors Network, men and women have been assaulted and harassed forever. And there's never been consent. And there was no time for them to speak up about that. There was no way to give voice. And if they did, it was minimized. They were victim blamed. They were then retaliated against, which then meant we were breeding environments of not only silence, but complicity. So now we're moving into this new place where we have to acknowledge what I'm meaning in my heart versus what I am doing in action may not be lining up, and the impact I'm having on another person is harmful and detrimental to them. And so it doesn't matter what our intent is. What matters is how we have spoken, how we have behaved, how we have conducted ourselves. And I want to even take this a bit further, George. When we're talking about leaders who have a significant amount of power and position in places and influence, how we conduct and live that out has huge impact on people's lives, whether we see it or not. And we are ultimately responsible for that.
So a lot of people are upset that the governor resigned, or some people are, some people aren't. They're upset because here is a governor who has championed some of the most progressive policies and legislation, or signed into law, very progressive legislation on this very topic of sexual harassment, and was a leader during the COVID. What people are struggling with is, why are we taking that man down? We, right? Why are we taking that man down who did so much good for the community? Why do we struggle with the fact that people who do good can also do something else, Randy? That's part of what this, I'm going down 3 layers with this. I'm starting with, he was great. And this was Alec Baldwin. I had even people who I trust and respect saying, "You're happy now, New York? Look at what you've done." And now, so speak to that idea of, yeah, he did a whole lot of good stuff.
I think we really struggle with understanding both and knowing that you can do wonderful things and you can advance great policies, and then you can do harm, and you have to be accountable for harm you cause. I don't want to take away the wonderful progressive legislation that has occurred in the state of New York around sexual harassment, around campus sexual assault, around marriage equality, around so many things that are very close to our heart and our work. But it's not okay to advance great policy and do good things and then cause harm to some people. That is, to me, unconscionable, because if we're going to excuse harmful behavior, whose lives are we saying don't matter so that we could get this policy we liked or that policy we liked? I think that the accountability is really important. And I know you mentioned earlier you were going to ask about redemption, and I'm conscious how fast time may go. And I just want to say that I believe in the possibility of redemption for people. I believe in healing and people changing their behavior. But I know that the critical first step is to own and acknowledge the harm you've caused without defense, without misdirection, without blaming the person who's been harmed. Our governor has not brought us that, and that is one of the real pain points for me now. I think he could have stood up as a model and said, I caused harm. It doesn't matter what I thought I was doing. This is why I advanced this legislation. This is why I stepped down. And maybe in a few years, he would have been in a place to come back into the public eye and advance policy, having really learned and grown as a human. That's the piece, I think, for redemption. You have to acknowledge the behavior and you have to change it and not make excuses and not deflect. So
I wanted to, let me stay there for a minute then, because it is my belief that for many in the work of gender-based violence prevention, that redemption is not possible, or at least not. And I say redemption, and I'm sensitive, and I want to acknowledge the survivor here, right? Identified survivor here, that who gets to decide when someone gets to be redeemed? That's another piece of it, because on the one hand, you know, is he like, so we have the post of all the men who've been accused, and not, I think part of it is none of them have said, I caused harm, my bad, let me get this right. Look, I've said in my trainings, I've caused harm, I know better now, and I own that what I did wasn't right. So I get to say that because that's a truth in my life. And I'm hoping that as I do my work that I'm living that life. But I sometimes feel that there's no time for a person who've caused harm. In this case, it doesn't feel like there's a space for redemption. And who gets to decide that, I think, is the other side of that. So either one of you can take that, but how do we hold space for what needs to happen, Angela, for us to feel that? And then I'll add another thing. This is my 29-minute question. And why are we so anxious for that to happen too? right? Because whose voice is not in the conversation. And while we're talking about whose voice, I want to talk about the responsibility of the victim because I'm hearing some of that too. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's start with the redemption piece.
So I think it is historical in nature to not want to forgive and provide a path of redemption. I think that our penal system and our criminal justice system is examples of that. The challenge is that we back ourselves into a corner when it becomes us. And so there is this healthy conversation, right? What is Vera House about? Vera House is about promoting, teaching, living healthy relationships. There has to get to be this place, I think, in any individual's life, in any community's life, where there is some semblance of forgiveness and understanding. If not, it will continue to be harmful for you, the victim, for everyone. So how then do we get on this path of forgiveness and redemption? And Randy has outlined to you what accountability looks like, which is ultimately the first step. You cannot move into redemption when you've not done those things. But the challenge that you're posing is that some people will never allow another human being to be redeemed. And that also has to be true. People who are harmed may never be able to see that person again in a way that they are living out something new, of new behavior, new thinking, new ways of existing in the world. But I also don't think everyone has to. I think somebody has to. And just like our own accountability programs, right? We have groups of people who have caused harm, who spend time with us at Vera House, who are actively seeking and wanting to do things differently. And it doesn't mean that it shows up or manifests itself instantly. This is a lifelong journey. And so there isn't an answer that is going to make anyone happy that, wow, in 6 months, somebody has completely turned that around. I also want to say this. In the work of anti-racism, or really looking at racial equity, one of the terms that we use is this idea of being performative, right? It means I want to act woke, I want to look woke, I want to use the terms, and I want to show up in a way that makes me seem like I know. And I would say victims and survivors are in the same predicament. We're looking for authentic, genuine transformation. We're not looking for a performative human being to say, yes, I know what I did I was wrong. We're looking for the genuine, authentic, hey, these are the behaviors and this was the thinking that contributed to my doing that. I now know that that's not helpful. And so I've now begun to think about and began to change the way I'm talking and thinking and living with other people because it has been harmful. And I think here's the other thing, George, we've all done that in our life because we've all caused harm. All of us have caused harm. Are we willing to be vessels of redemption for ourselves? And if we do that, then we will liberate others to also have that same path.
One of the things that we hear in our sexual harassment training is the victim, well, those women should have spoke up sooner, or they should know if that happened to me, then I would do X and such and such and such, right? So a lot of responsibility on the victim to speak up in those situations. And I would point out that many of these victims did speak up and did not have their cases properly adjudicated. So that's number one. But there is still a feeling, especially because most of the victims or survivors in any sexual harassment case are going to be women, that's just this sense that you need to speak up for yourself. And I taught my daughter that she's not going to take anything. One. Two, this idea that the third party, a third party situation, you and I could be okay messing around, but if somebody else sees it and they're not okay, and that's still a problem, right? Even though it may not have been a problem for me, now I got to deal with you thinking it's a problem, but it's not a problem for me. Maybe that's too much for this moment right now, but those are the kinds of things that we hear in this, and when we're out in the community about why this is so complicated. So maybe we should just say it's complicated, but if you want to respond to that.
Well, one piece I would say is a lot of these people did report to somebody.
Right.
And like in many of these situations, action wasn't taken. And in the situation for the state trooper that we became aware of when the report came out, she was very clearly told by a supervisor, keep it on the truck. So when people say you should speak up, her supervisor, the person she would go to, is saying, you don't talk about this. So the idea that it's easy for somebody to come forward when these messages are swirling, and when the first person who comes forward, there's an attack squad basically put to bring her down. It's interesting to me that people think, why don't they just come forward? I think more, wow, how does anybody find the courage to come forward with the response they typically get?
Well, Vera House partners with, responds to, and prevents sexual violence, domestic violence, and other forms of abuse. How do people access the services of Vera House?
Well, certainly you can call our 24-hour support line, 315-468-3260. Also, you can go to our website, get some information there about programs, and we have a chat support line now available on our website from 8:30 in the morning till 9 p.m. every day of the week. And you just go to the Vera House website, and right at the top of the page, you'll see support chat, and you can get connected with somebody there.
Final thoughts, Angela?
It's a new day, George. It's a new day.
Angela Douglas, Randy Bregman, co-directors of Vera House. Maybe another time we'll talk about that. Because I think that's, I've said to people, it's such an amazing thing that happened when Randy, who was formerly the director, decided to bring in a co-director, and what that meant and why she did that. So that's another time, another chance.
Another time, George, we're happy to come back. You know where to find us.
We know, I do. Randy Bregman and Angela Douglas are the co-directors of Vera House. Remember the number to call for crisis and support, 315-468-3260, 24 hours, 7 days a week, verahouse.org for web chat. And by the way, if you're interested in the 12-man model, you can hit us up there as well. Inspiration for the nation.
Thank you.